Hi guys, this is Jody. I just wanted to jump on here real quick and do a sort of an in-depth explanation of my process for texturing complex shapes. You can see here I've got this chair that I've modeled in SketchUp, and I've modeled this using SubD. So if I go into this particular item, you can see the chair is made up of several different groups, and then each one of these groups is a subdivided shape. So I've created this chair, and then I've subdivided it. Then when I'm looking at it here, you can see all my subdivided lines. So that you don't see those subdivided lines, I've selected the whole thing, and then I did soften smooth, and then smooth normals, and then soften coplanar, so that everything is nice and smooth. And this is the end result of a chair that I have modeled. If you'd like to see some examples of modeling some other furniture, you can look at some of my other tutorials. But the problem that we run into here now is that I want to put a fabric on this chair. It's one thing if my fabric is a solid or just a color, but if I want to be able to show for example my design client what their chair is going to look like in the fabric that we have selected, and I try to put one of my fabrics onto this chair, for example. I've got some fabrics in here that I've used before. For example, let's say I've got this little texture here. If I try to put this onto my chair, I'm going to go into the individual items. You can see it doesn't show up good, especially on the arms here. It's going to get all, oh, that actually worked pretty good. It's inconsistent how it shows up. It's not right. So what I'm going to try to do is demonstrate how we can, I'm going to undo that, how we can make this look better. A lot of times too, I have to put the texture on the surface itself and not on the group. And we'll look at that in a minute, and we'll see. It's just kind of funky looking. That's not really what it's supposed to be like. Some of the tools that we have, we can use as they are, and they work pretty good. But there's a little bit of fussing that needs to be done when we're doing something like this. So I'm going to undo that. And we're going to start by talking a little bit about some basics of your geometry here and your textures that you're working with. I have a texture file that I've created. I call it a UV map. And I have made it in Photoshop, and then when I imported it, I scaled it so that it is 10 inches by 10 inches. So when I put this texture onto a piece of geometry, I'm just going to position it here so that it's straight. That's my 10 inch by 10 inch square, and you can see it repeats, and it makes the pattern nice and uniform. Then if I put it onto this bigger piece here, you can see as it gets bigger, the texture remains appropriate, and we can position this so that it's all starting in the same place, so everything lines up properly. This just gives you an idea of how this texture works, okay? And I'm using this as a reference, basically. This is not what my final piece is going to look like, but this is my reference for the fabric that I'm going to be putting on. So obviously when you're working on a flat plane, you can move the texture and scale it and do whatever you want. But when you're working on something that's got more than one plane to it, you have to be able to apply the texture to all the surfaces, the entire surface, uniformly. So just so that we can look at this piece here, I have this toolbar up here. This is visibilities that I'm toggling on and off. So this is my hidden geometry. So I'm going to look at my hidden geometry here for a minute and just note that you know, these are all, in each of these triangles is an individual face, and we want them all to work together to map the texture. So the first tool that we're going to use, I'm going to turn my hidden geometry off again. The first tool that we're going to use is, and I'm just going to explode this so that I'm working with my individual pieces here. So the first tool that we're going to use is one that most people have. It's called ThruPaint. It's by Fredo 6. This is the toolbar, and I've put it up onto my toolbar up here. So I'm going to close this just so that my screen is more easier to look at. And what we're going to do is, there's two different ways that you can apply a texture to a surface. You can apply it to the group. And if you look at your entity info over here, I've selected my group, and my group has no texture on it. And if I put a texture on that, you can see it looks all kinds of funky. That's not really what we want it to look at. But now this texture is on this group, and it's not actually on the surface itself. What we really want to do is we want to put this, when we're doing this process anyway, we want to put this texture on the surface. So I want to go back and undo, take that off, so it's not on the group, but it's on the surface. Okay, so we're going to go into the group. We're going to select the whole thing by triple clicking, and we're going to apply this texture to the surface there. And then we're going to click out again. Now, when we're using ThruPaint, a lot of times ThruPaint will accomplish what it is that you need. We're going to open that toolbar up, and they have three different mapping tools here. This one is the quad UV mapping, this one is the natural UV, and this one is projected. Quad UV really only works if you've got only quads on your geometry. And even though we started off in this geometry with quads, once it's been subdivided, I end up with all kinds of funny little shapes right here that are not technically quads. So a lot of times this tool doesn't actually work on a subdivided geometry. So if I try to click on this and I go here, it's going to give me this everything is lit up red, and it's saying that it doesn't really work. If we choose the natural UV and we click on, that's not really working too well either. If we click on, and then if we click on projected, what projected is, that looks a lot better. You can see that the texture is going across all the surfaces, but projected acts as if you're putting the texture on from whatever angle you're looking at. So if I go up here and I reset and I go back and I try to put this back on again. So if I look up from here, now we've put the texture on based on this view, and so things stretch along this view. So what I find often with this tool is that switching between natural and UV, or I'm sorry, natural and perspective mode, a lot of times will help me to reset that surface. So I've gone to perspective, projected, and then I'm going to go back to natural, and I'm going to reset, and I'm going to try to line up my greens and reds here in a way that makes sense. Once you click on the surface here, you get these toolbars, okay, this positioning thing. So this one is going to rotate it like that, okay, and then we can switch the UV, the directions of things by changing things that way. You can see this is actually pretty good. It's a little bit wonky down at the bottom here, but it's not too bad. And because I've got this texture material that I've created, I can kind of get an idea if my geometry is, or my material is mapped in a logical scale. So for example, I know that this piece right here, if I just measure it here, it's about 6 5/8, 7 inches high, okay? 7 1/4, something like that. So when I'm looking at my map over here, I can use this middle bar here to scale things, and I can say, oh, that looks pretty good in terms of the size of it. So I know that from here to the top here is 7 inches, and each one of my squares represents 1 inch. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This from green to green is 5 inches, and then from arrow to arrow is 10 inches. So I can look at it this way, say that looks, in terms of scale, that looks pretty good. Like I said, it's a little bit wonky down at the bottom here. I'm not going to worry about that too much because it's pretty benign. But what's going to happen when we go here, I'm going to turn off my hidden geometry. It looks pretty good, but what happens when we go to this piece here and we select our texture and we put that on there, and then we're going to I did want to also point out that the ThruPaint tool works both inside and outside the group. So I can click on the outside of it and I can see that's not right, but if I click on perspective and I reset that, that looks pretty good, except for obviously it's all messed up here because things are stretching as they go around the curves because we were looking at it straight on. But if I go back to natural and then, whoops, go back to natural and then reset that again, it's still kind of wonky over here. So this is where we get into fussy sort of situation. How much does that matter? It depends on what you're doing with your furniture. If you're going to be rendering it, if you're going to be seeing it from far away, it might not matter so much. You might not notice. But if you're going to be looking at it fairly close up, or it's going to be in the foreground of your render shot, then you might not want that to show up like that. So this is my process, and this is where it gets a little bit funky. I have this material and it's been mapped to this piece, and I've used my natural setting here to set the map of that piece. The other tool, this is what I often do. I have this other tool that I use, and this is called SketchUV, and this is the toolbars for SketchUV, and here I put it up onto my bar as well, so we'll look at it there. What I do is I put the texture on, I set it using the natural UV map using ThruPaint, then I go to SketchUV, and you have to have your surface selected when you do this. So your surface has to be selected. So right now it's not selected. Right now it is. You can see it's kind of like dotty and spotted looking. I click on the SketchUV button and I get this cursor that's got this, I don't know, circle arrow thing. Hover over my surface, right click, and I select box map. That makes things look pretty good all the way around. But you'll notice that the texture is really big. So all it's done is it's taken this texture and it's made it basically one repeat across the whole thing. So this tool does have the ability to change this. I can go up to measurements and I can type in ×5, and it will reduce the texture by 5. So it's scaled it down by 5. It's a little fussy. It's not 100%, like it's not gonna be exact if you want it to be able to match up to something else. For example, if I want it to be able to match this, I don't know what to multiply it by in order to get it to match this. If I go back in here and I say SketchUV and box map again, it resets it, and then I can try ×2. Whoops, sorry. Box map, select it, box map, and ×2. That's closer, but it's still not right. So trying to get it to be the right size is really tricky. So what I do is we're going to do the whole process again. Box map, it's large, and then I'm going to go back to ThruPaint, and I'm going to make sure that I'm on my natural, and when I click, I can scale. And it scales pretty evenly across. So what I can do is I can click out of that group, go back to ThruPaint, click on the outside of the group, and then I can position this however is appropriate. So I'm going to rotate my UV I want the green arrows going right and the red arrows going up. There we go. So I'm going to position it. I'm going to move my cursor to the middle of this red line here so that this is where I'm dragging from, and I'm going to drag it and center it over that one, and then put my cursor back on this red line, and then I'm going to scale. So I'm just going to scale this down until it matches up with pretty close with the other texture that I've placed. Okay, so that looks pretty good, but it's still not 100% good on these edges. It looks good across the front and across the back, but these edges are not quite right. So, and again, depending on where you are in your scene, what you're looking at, that might be okay. It's a lot better than it was before. The next part that we're going to do is, this is where it starts to really get fussy, because now we're going to force the UVs. We're going to force the texture to follow a specific part of this surface. So what I'm going to do here is, and you want to make sure that whatever modeling you're doing, you're done with it, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this surface, and I'm going to go to SubD and convert to plane mesh. Now I'm going to double click into my object. I'm going to show my hidden geometry. And for right now, I'm going to turn off my texture so that I can see what I'm doing. Now, you can, because this has been softened, you can see all of these lines are dotted. What I want to do is I want to select these lines in a way that makes the most sense visually. So I'm going to select these individual lines here. Okay, there's different ways that you can do this now, depending on how you want to make your selection. I can select one little line, and then I can use this is quad face tools, and I can do the loops, not the loop selection, I forget what that one's called, but you can do that, and anything that follows that line is going to be selected. I don't want all of that, so I'm not going to use that method. The other method you can use is in SketchUV. There's this other tool called the path selection tool. And here I'm going to go right to this corner. I'm going to select, and I'm going to drag and click, drag and click. And then I'm going to decide where I want to go down this side. I'm going to drag and click, drag and click, drag and click, click. And then I'm going to hit enter. And I want you to look up here in our in our entity info. Right now, the line that I've selected is soft. So from here, I'm going to hit enter. And now it has unsoftened that line. So now, when I turn off my hidden geometry, I'm going to see that line is delineated on my surface. Okay, what I want to do is I want to have a complete surface that has no holes on the edges. So I'm going to go back into here, And if you click on one individual line, if I click on that, I can see that that's soft. I can click the soft off and it makes it unsoft. And I just want to make sure all my unsoft lines are connected to each other. So it makes a complete circuit all the way around. Now when I turn off my hidden geometry, I've got a surface. When I click on it, just that surface gets selected. And this one is just this surface. So I'm going to do this on the other side. Okay, now again, when I turn off my hidden geometry and I select this surface, it is an independent surface. Whoops, somehow I broke something over here. There we go. Okay, turn my textures back on. Now what I can do, I can come in here and I can select just this surface. And I go to ThruPaint and I'm going to reset the map by clicking on the perspective mode. And I'm going to come over here to this one and reset this map too. And then I'm going to go back to the natural and I'm going to line things up the way that I want them. So I'm going to scale this. I noticed that my arrows are going the opposite direction, so I'm going to mirror the UV. Nope. I want this one. Mirror this. There we go. How about these arrows? Okay, everything's lining up right. So I'm going to just line this up. I can use my arrow keys. Whoops, you got to make sure that this cursor is on the surface that you want to affect. So if I put my cursor over here and then I go with my arrow keys, it's working on that surface. So this is the surface that I'm working on. Use my arrow keys to kind of line that up, and then I'm going to click my cursor on this middle line, which is lined up, and I'm going to scale out from that until I get close there. I can also rotate this so that it is positioned in a way that makes sense for my piece. And I probably need to move, whoops, using the wrong arrow keys. I probably need to move so that it lines up with the pattern. That looks about right. Now we're going to do that on this side too. Remember, we set this to perspective, so we're going to set it back to natural. And usually it lines up pretty good the second time around. So I'm just going to there we go, that's pretty good. I'm just going to line this one up a little bit more. There we go. Okay. that looks pretty good. We would go through the whole same process on the arms. We would unsoften the parts that we felt we could force the geometry or force the texture onto the geometry, whatever makes visual sense for your piece. This is not the texture that I want to have on my chair, however. So there's two different ways that you can change this. Well, there's three different ways really. ThruPaint has a tool right here. This is meant to transfer the UV from one texture to another. I honestly don't find that it works very well, and I don't know if it's because I'm on a Mac or what the problem is. I don't tend to use that one because it just confuses things. The first way you can change things is you can select your geometry. You can go back into the surface, and you can, over here in the entity info for that particular surface, we can go, let's get my fabric back. We can select that so that it's got a highlight around it, and then I can click on the other material, and there's that texture. Okay. The other, so we can do that one surface at a time. The other way that I like to do it is using a, I have a extension called Material Replacer. Where is that? Material Replacer. Oops. It's under Tools, Material Replacer. The way that I use this tool is I will put the material there, and then I will go to Material Replacer. I get this little eyedropper. If I click on this material, and then I click on this material, there we go, everything's been replaced. You'll notice that my texture is sideways. That was because, if you notice, I have my UVs running the wrong direction. So really I should this is going to reset it now. My red arrows should be going sideways, and my green arrows should be going up and down. This is one of the things about ThruPaint is it's gone and selected that other material, even though that wasn't what I had, because it was the last one that I used. So go back into ThruPaint. Go back into ThruPaint. Make sure that this is the material that's selected. I want red left and right, green up and down. Oh, see, it keeps doing that. Use these little arrows, you can see what gets highlighted over here. Let's see if that will work. All right, now I'm not resetting it, and I just want to rotate 90 degrees. Rotate 90 degrees. Is that right? Yes. Rotate 90 degrees. Rotate 90 degrees. Whoops. There we go. I got to move it, line it back up again. Okay. Now, when I replace the material, this one's wrong too. Let's see if we can just rotate 90 degrees. And let's get it lined back up. Okay, now when I use material replacer, select this material, replace it with that material. That looks better. I can come in here and get this to match up a little bit better. You have to kind of pick and choose which spots are important for. Okay, so it's kind of fussy, but in the end, we end up with a piece that is mapped properly, and it looks a lot better than it did before. So I hope that was helpful. I hope it wasn't too confusing. Honestly, this is a process that I do, and it's a lot of fussing, and it's a lot of messing around and redoing and mapping and unmapping and remapping and setting the textures up. But in the end, it makes the piece look so much better, and I'm usually pretty happy with how my textures are laid out. I'm going to go through in another video. I'm going to talk about how you can avoid doing a lot of this by using texture mapping through V-Ray. If you happen to be a V-Ray user, I'll show you how to use that. It makes things a lot simpler, but it also isn't perfect. So it just depends on the level of detail that you need to be able to see in your piece, and how much time you have, really. If you've got time to do this and it's worth it, then I definitely think that you can force the program to accomplish some decent texture mapping. It's still not 100%, but it's a lot better than what it was before. All right, thanks guys, and if you have questions or if you want to see me demonstrate anything more specific, just leave some messages or some comments in the messages below, and I will hopefully see you again soon. Thanks a lot. Bye.